So for the last 3 units, well, not 3 units, for the last 2 units, we've been doing table views, right? So as of unit 2, when we started going into UI kit and talking about UI views, we introduced UI table view very early because at that point we needed a way to present our data in a list format, right? We presented our data in a list format using cells, using rows, using cells, and we got whatever data we have. We have an array of items. We have a dictionary of items. Either or, we needed some way to present that data. And UIKit gives us 2 mechanisms to present that data in a scrolling manner so that the user could browse through different items in your collection. One of those ways is a UI table view, right? So we saw UI table view very early. Yes, there's other ways to present data like a UI picker view, but to really show that data with an image and everything else, we use a UI table view. So we use a UI table view very early. It's easy to set up, right? And most apps you use, they scroll from top to bottom or bottom to top, presenting some sort of UI with elements in there, right? So we presented UI table view, okay? It inherits from UI scroll view, like everything else that scrolls inherits from UI scroll view. So UI table view inherits from scroll view. And the table view has cells, right? So if I have 100 items, the table view is able to populate 100 rows of items. Each row, well, the row starts off at index 0, and it goes index 1, 2, 3, etc., same as an array. So the same way you index an array, you index inside of a table view. And we use this index path. Index path has 2 items that we need or could need. We have a section, so index path.section if your items has sections in there. And to get to the particular item, you use row. So there's section in that index path and there's row in that index path, right? So that's like table view there. And a table view has a delegate. So the user clicks on a cell, you get notified, somebody clicked on your cell, you could go ahead and do what you want to do. And the table view, primarily, it needs 2 data source methods, right? What are those 2 data source methods that the table view needs? Luba, what's the first one? Cell for row. What's the next one now? Number, right? So those are the 2 critical parts of a table view to get it to work. One, it needs to know how many items am I going to lay out on my view, right? Is it 10? Is it 0? Is it 100? How many items am I going to load, right? So the table view gets that information from the data source object. The data source object says, yes, my array has 20 items. Great. The next job of that table view is to know how to configure each row. How does that row look like, right? Does that row have a label? Does it have an image? Does it have 5 images? What does it have? So that it's the job of the data source object to say, this is the way to configure each row, right? So that's why those 2 critical methods are required on the data source object. On the delegate object, no methods are required. It's up to us to implement what we want to implement. For example, if we want to tell the table view each row should be 50 points high, what method are we implementing for that? Height for row, right? So height for row method on that protocol will say, I want to return 50 points for the height of each row. Great, so that's a table view summary there. Everything we just said about table views are very similar in a UI collection view. But the UI collection view is more powerful with that said, right? A UI collection view, you could lay out your views. You could scroll your views top down. You could scroll them left, right. You could have columns. Within those columns, you could have more data in there. So the UI collection view itself is very much more flexible than a table view. A table view, out of the box, you get a cell. The cell has predefined elements on it. For example, each cell, each row has an image view. Each row has a text label. Each row has a detailed text label. But a collection view does not have anything. Out of the box, the collection view cell does not have anything. There's no label, there's no image, there's nothing. It's up to the developer to say what you want on that particular cell of the collection view. Okay? Also important on a collection view is the way it's laid out. So to have a collection view work, it needs to have what's known as a UI collection view flow layout. The flow layout is responsible to tell the collection view, how are you scrolling? Are you scrolling horizontally? Are you scrolling vertically, right? What's the size of each item or each cell? What's the size of that? It's the responsibility of the UI collection view flow layout to give that information to the collection view. So a collection view cannot work without having some sort of flow layout to manage the way it looks and the way it behaves, okay? So that is different from a table view, okay? As with the table view, a collection view needs to know how much data it has, how many items does it have. So it has a data source, very similar to a table view. So it has an items for row at, or cell for row at, sorry. And it has a number of items, not number of rows, but number of items, very similar. So how many items do I have? And give me the cell for each of those items. So those two methods are very similar and are required on a UI collection view, okay? So collection view, more flexible, scrolls vertically or horizontally, needs to have a flow layout. The flow layout tells the collection view how to lay its items. Collection view does not have any properties on, no UI elements on the cell. So the cell is completely empty, there's nothing there. Okay? As we start, when we go into programmable UI, we'll see how when you set up your collection view in code, how the layout is very important to have. If you don't have that layout, your collection view will crash because it says, hey, I cannot do anything without my layout. But for today, we'll be using storyboard, so there's no issue there because the storyboard itself has a flow layout by default. So the minute you drag your collection view into your scene, into Canvas, it has a flow layout already with a default behavior. Okay? Great. So let us talk about some more collection view topics here. So here we have a collection view. The collection view takes the entire size of the device here. So that's what we'll be doing today, very similar. We'll have our scene. We'll look for a collection view in the library, in the object library. We'll drag it over to our scene. We will set the constraints to 0 all around. Very similar to when we do a table view. We lay out the collection view such that we have 3 items. It scrolls vertically. And each item, it will be our responsibility in code to tell the collection view what size is the item. And we'll do that via the collection view flow layout delegate. Right? The flow layout delegate will return some CG size. A CG size is a tuple of 2 values. It has a width and it has a height. So we'll return a CG size to tell the collection view what item, what size is this item. Right? And the way we'll calculate that, we'll do some math here to calculate what the size of the item, what the width of the item should be. And we'll figure out what the width of the item is based on this property here. Again, that's a singleton here. The UI screen.main. So UI screen.main.bounds is a singleton. Bounds here is the size of that particular device. It could be an Apple Watch. It could be an iPhone 5S. Whatever it is, whatever that device is, give us the bounds of that device. And on the bounds of that device, there's a size, and that's the CG size I'm talking about. So that CG size has a width and a height. What we're interested in on that CG size is the width, right? What is the width of that entire span of that device? From left edge to right edge. What is the width? And we'll use that width along with some math to figure out what's the item size. We'll add in some spacing. We'll divide it by 3 in that case, if we have 3 items laying out from left to right. And we'll come up with some size width for the item width. Okay? A point of confusion sometimes, is knowing what the difference between, there's 2 delegate methods, or there's 2 properties on a flow layout that you could set up. There's 2 properties. One is called minimum line spacing, and the other one is called InterItem spacing, right? That tells the items what's the minimum space allowed between each item, or what's the minimum space allowed between each line of items. That's a bit confusing there. So if you can draw it, or most times if you catch yourself being confused there, trial and error will get you to what you want. Because based on the layout, based on the scrolling direction of the collection view, will determine what is the InterItem spacing and what is the minimum line spacing, right? For example, here we have a vertical scrolling collection view, right? It goes from top down. The item spacing here is from left to right. Why is it from left to right? Because in that particular diagram here that I drew, do we see 3 columns here? Column 1, column 2, column 3. So picture if your collection view layout, flow layout, is vertically scrolling, then that means it's a column-based layout, right? It's a column-based layout. If it's a column-based layout, that means the item spacing, the space between each item, is from left to right, okay? From column 1 to column 2, that space there is called the InterItem spacing, okay? So if you say, for example, the minimum spacing is 5 points, right? So if each item is being laid out, and at some point it gets to that minimum size, it cannot lay out any more items, it will go to a new line, right? So you specify some minimum space, and when it gets to that minimum space, it will start laying out other items on the other line, on the other grid. So if I start at the top, I have 3 items. I get to that minimum spacing, there's no more space allowed there, I'll go to the next row, or to the next line in that case, okay? The minimum line spacing and the InterItem spacing comes in handy if you want your spacing to be a particular width or size. Your designer comes, your designer says they want some Instagram-looking collection view. Everybody, like when you go to Instagram and you're about to post a photo, there's minimum spacing there. It's probably like 2 points or 1 point, or probably nothing at all. So if I get to that, let me see if I have it here. Hopefully it's friendly here. Okay, so I have Instagram. I am posting something. Access my camera, sure. So here is a collection view. Do we see the collection view? Right? So there's minimum line spacing and there's minimum InterItem spacing here, right? It's a vertical scrolling, so both item spacing and InterItem spacing is the same. It's probably, at this point, it's probably 1 point, right? There's barely any spacing there. Do we see that? Right? So that's what I'm referring to. So your designer comes and they're like, hey, this is what I want. So at this point, your minimum item spacing and InterItem spacing will be basically 1 pixel or 1 point. The default is 10 points, right? For both InterItem spacing and interline spacing, both defaults is 10 points, okay? It's up to you if you want to change that up or down, but that's the default. So that's what I'm referring to when I say the collection view here. That's a collection view. Going back. Great. Okay, what else we'll discuss here before we jump into code? So keep in mind that this is vertical, so item spacing is left to right. Items are laid out vertically in this case. If we go down, we'll come back to this later here. So if we go down to a horizontally scrolling. So horizontally scrolling, watch what's happening now. We don't have columns now, we have rows, right? So if it's horizontal, the grid is in a row format, right? From left to right. That's how our items are. And in that case, we saw that the InterItem spacing is different now. So basically, going back to math, perpendicular if we know perpendicular, so perpendicular, if I say something is perpendicular, so if I have some item here that's going from north to south, everybody? Yes? And if I say, draw a line perpendicular to this north-south line. Perpendicular means at a right angle. So perpendicular would be laying out some line like this. So if you keep in mind that the inter-item spacing is perpendicular to the scrolling direction, that's fine there. That's gonna get you to what you want. Everybody with me? So if I'm vertically scrolling, my interline spacing will be perpendicular to the scrolling direction. Okay, so if this is the scrolling direction here, scrolling direction, the inter-item spacing would be this. It would be perpendicular. Okay? Cool? Any questions about that? So we just introduced collection views, we introduced the flow layout, we introduced how minimum interline spacing and minimum line spacing is different. Again, don't feel like you have to memorize anything here. It could be trial and error, and it could be just knowing that the inter-item spacing is perpendicular to the scrolling direction of your collection view. Okay, there's no memorizing here to be done. Great, cool. So let's go to the code. Any questions before we jump into code? Okay, great. Let's go to code here. We'll be using for the particular project we're building out with this demo, we'll be using this endpoint at the end of the lesson. So we have an endpoint at the end of the lesson here. Puppy love, right? Dogs, right? So we have a dog API that will be hidden, and we'll be returning 50 dogs, not 10 dogs. The maximum dogs you could return from this random endpoint here is 50. So we'll change that number from 10 to 50. So let's go ahead and actually grab that endpoint here, copy link, and go to Postman. Go to Postman, paste it in, and send it, and make sure you're getting back JSON. And all the JSON is images. So we get back 50 images of dogs, random dog images.
Where do you find this API?
It's in the, what's the thing, to do, that GitHub link we sent. It should be there. Do we all have access to the endpoint? Yeah? We all got data in Postman? Awesome. All right, so just keep that, and change it to 50, right? Copy that URL, just make sure you still have it copied, and let's go create a project. So open up Xcode, and create new project. It's a single view application. We'll keep the name with CollectionView in there, so it's easier for us to find. And we'll say random dogs. So CollectionView hyphen random dogs. And go ahead and click next. And click create. Great. Perfect. So what are we doing? Again, we are trying to build out a collection view of dog images using a layout very similar to this one. So we'll have 3 photos being lined across the device, and we'll be scrolling that collection view vertically. Let's go ahead and set that up. All right, let's navigate over to our main storyboard. Navigate over to our main storyboard, go to our object library, and search for CollectionView. It's a collection view. Drag over CollectionView. and we are taking up the whole device. We set in constraints, so add new constraints. 0 to the top, 0 to the lead-in, 0 to the bottom, and 0 to trailing. So those are 4 constraints. Great. So if we see we have one item here, very similar to our prototype cell in table view, right? Well, actually in table view, you don't even have a prototype cell. You have to add one. But here we have this prototype cell. We could go ahead and drag it, make it bigger, like that. Anything we're doing here, as we have done in the past in storyboard, does not affect the actual size of the item, right? That's more visually for us to see what's happening here so that we could work better in the canvas with that particular view. First thing we want to do is, if your cell is selected, make sure your cell is selected. Make sure that your cell is selected. Give it the reuse identifier. The reuse identifier, we'll call it dog cell. So dog cell, press enter. Great. Next, let's click on our collection view and see what we have. So click on your collection view, go to your size inspector. Things we could see here, or attributes we could see, let's zoom in. None of the attributes we have here right now will affect, again, anything that we see in the actual app. For example, I dragged out my cell, and I see the cell size change from 279 to 280. We have an estimate size here. As of iOS 13, it is by default, it's automatic. So by default, the cell itself tries to resize itself based on its content. So based on its content, it tries to resize the cell, right? So later we'll come back here and we'll adjust this automatic here. But for now, I won't do it because we don't know what's exactly why we're doing it. The why we'll see as we run the app. We'll see there's a bug or a potential bug there that we could come back and fix with this estimated size here. A collection view, you could give it a header, you could give it a footer, but as opposed to our table view, which is a bit simpler to set up, in a collection view, you need to have a supplementary view. You need to have basically a subclass. I'll come back to that later, but today we're just introducing collection views. But know that you could have a header and a footer on your collection view. You could use that, you could add that header via what's known as a supplementary view. And that supplementary view, you have to subclass what's called UI Collection Reusable View, right? So there's a bit more there to get it to work, but it is possible to have section headers on your collection view there. There's a lot of flexibility with collection views. As of iOS 13 again, you guys got a bunch of really cool stuff here in 2019. There's what's called, today we'll be using UICollectionView flow layout. iOS 13 introduced what's called UICollectionView compositional layout, which gives more flexibility still upon collection view. So there's even more flexibility on it. And with that came what's known as NS diffable data sources, which we might get into later in the course. But currently, right now, we want to know how to use a collection view flow layout, how to feel comfortable with that. It's been around since iOS 6. So even if there's new APIs that got introduced, like I said yesterday, new is new, but old still needs support, and old is still being done, okay? Again, it's been more mature than the current API paradigm, right? But know that there's 2 different ways to lay out collection views now, right? One is UI Collection View flow layout, and the newer one is UI Collection View compositional layout, okay? So if you've seen the App Store, for example, the App Store rebranded themselves using compositional layout. It's more flexible, less code, more dynamic, right? The possibilities are endless with that. Great. Okay, so what do we need on our cell here? We need an image view, so let's go ahead and add an image view. Search for image view and add an image view onto our cell. And let's go ahead and constrain the image view such that it's 0 all around the cell. So 0 to the top of the cell, 0 to the lead-in, 0 to the bottom of the cell, and 0 to the trailing cell. We will change the content mode of the image view. So click on your image view, go to Attribute Inspector, and go down to Content Mode here, and we'll change Aspect Fit to Aspect Fill. Okay, great. So like with table views, we need a class to manage. We need a subclass of UICollectionView cell to manage this particular cell that we're creating now. Right? Keep in mind that the nib or the zibs that we saw last week, you could also create a zip file for your cell. Okay? Luba, questions? Okay. Stop me if there's any questions, please, before I speed ahead here. Yes?
On mine, there's kind of a border. Is that like a different cell?
There's a border.
Around,
Did you drag it all the way to the edge of the cell?
I did. But
Oh, do you have that 0 bug thing? Set it to 0. If you set it to 0, does it not go to the edge?
I'm sorry, where's your book?
We said 0 all around the cell, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Great. So let's create a new file. We'll call a new file dog cell. It's a Swift file. Let's go ahead and create a new file to manage that cell we just created. So Command N, new file. Yes? For the cell, yeah, the CollectionView cell. So it's CocoTouch, sorry. Yeah, CocoTouch. I mean, we could do Swift and then subclass it, but just use CocoTouch. Thank you, sir. So go to CocoTouch, click on CocoTouch, not Swift, sorry. You could do Swift, but you just have to change foundation to UIKit. But go to CocoTouch, click Next, subclass of UICollectionView cell, exactly. So subclassing, as the mini says here, UICollectionView cell. And what's the name of our class? We said it's a dog cell. So we're subclassing UICollectionView cell in order for that cell to manage our cell in Storyboard, right? So we'll be dragging our outlet, same as we did with table views. Same as we did with table views. Julia?
Yeah, but I mean, table views you have default cell, and we can have custom cell. Here we have optional custom.
Yeah, there's no default cell with labels or anything like that. We have to add those. Okay, so we have a dog cell. Any other questions? We have a dog cell. We go next, and we go finish. We go create here. Great. So we have our dog cell. Let me make this bigger. We have our dog cell, and the one element we'll have for now is an image view. That's all we have. So we'll have an image view. So let's go to our assistant editor. Click on your assistant editor. Option, click on your dog cell. Coming from a UI table view background, what do we need to do here? Walk me through what we need to do. How can I make those two communicate with each other? The what? I gotta set the class, right? So I have to go to the identity inspector of this particular cell here and change the custom class to our dog cell, right? So let's open up our inspector. Click on our CollectionView cell, our dog cell here. Go over to our identity inspector. Go over to our identity inspector. And where it says UICollectionView cell, which is generic cell here, we want to change it to our own custom cell we just created. So we want to change it to our dog cell. So here, I'll type in dog cell, enter. Make sure you press enter. Great. We also have an identifier, right? We added the identifier. Yes, great. Okay, so at this point, let us control drag from our view. Let's control drag our image view. Make sure you select your image view in the document outline, right? You don't want to drag the content view, right? So control drag the image view over to our cell class. Control drag our image view over to our dog cell. And the name of it, we'll call it dog image view. So dog image view, connect. Great. Great, great, great. Okay, so we connected our cell. Let's go ahead and actually set up our API client. Get the dog data, set up a model, get the dog data, and we'll go back to our view controller to set up our data sources and so forth. Okay? Any questions before we go over? Any questions? Yes, sir.
What's a section?
What is a section? We'll have only one section here. You could have multiple sections. So you'll have multiple grades of items, for example, and each grade has its own section. So I could have a dog section of dog images. I could have a cat section of cat images. A section would be very similar. Let me just draw it out for you. Show what it looks like. So if I scroll up here, if we have, for example, we have our device, right? I could have two sections, for example. I could have a dog section here of dog images. At this point, I'll have it scroll horizontally. Everybody, right? So I'll have it scroll horizontally like this, and I'll have a next section down here called cats, scrolling horizontally. So this here would be section 0, and this here would be section 1. I mean, based on the index, right? So here I have two sections. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Great. But we don't want to make this too complicated too quickly. We just want to introduce basic collection views. We'll come back to collection views as we go through the course. Cool? Any other questions? Good questions there. So going back to our app. Okay.
Does our lab have sections?
Say that again.
Will we have sections?
When you get to the lab, don't look too far in the future. Be in the present. Let's get our collection view to work first and then think about the lab later. If the lab has sections, you could make it sections. Part of development is you just need enough to keep going, right?
What if we don't have enough?
You stop at the gas station and you get more fuel. All right, so let us keep going here. Great, so we need an API client. Let's create a new file. New file, Swift file. New file, Swift file, and we'll just call this dog API client. Awesome. So our API client, we have a struct here. It's called dog API client. And we'll have one static function called fetch dogs. Fetch dogs will have a completion handler marked at escaping here. Our completion does not return anything. It takes a result type of generic type. And for now, I will simply put in an array of strings here and some error. We'll come back, we'll refactor this to have our own app error here, which we've had before. But for now, this is what our function signature looks like. Next up, we have some sort of endpoint URL string, which is the dogs API endpoint. gets random images of dogs, gets 50 of them. Great. We'll guard against the URL. We'll create a URL using the URL initializer, which takes in a string called endpoint URL. At this point here, we have a bad URL, so we'll return a completion here. Failure with some sort of bad URL. So let's stop here for a second, because we need our network helper to continue on. Keep in mind that as we get more complex apps, we are abstracting more things that we should know fundamentally. Right? We abstract it away because not every app we write, we need to write URL session from scratch. Everybody with me? I'll keep saying that until, right? Keep in mind, at the end of the day, what makes that request? What makes that request? What class makes that request? URL session, right? URL session is that class that's responsible for making our network request, right? We pass it a request, Chelsea, but at the end of the day, URL session is the one that says data task, resume, right? But we're abstracting everything away. We have a network helper now to make our lives easier. But keep in mind, fundamentally, you still have ownership with knowing how that works or explaining what URL session is, okay? Please, right? Follow what Amini is doing. Have some Google Sheet or whatever. Things you don't understand, go back to it, okay? We have time to read. We could always read 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, right? So knowing the concepts and knowing the why is big there. Amini does not go forward if she does not know the why. Because that why, you have to explain it to that interviewer. Why? Why URL session? Why URL request? Why not URL, right? Can we just use URL? All those questions there. Okay, so with that said, we will use a dependency to get our network helper. But keep in mind that we should fundamentally know how it works. Great, so let's go ahead and add that. So I'll go to File. I'll go to Swift Packages. I'll go to File, I'll go to Swift Packages, add dependency. And for the dependency, it's https://github.com/alexpaul/image kit. You could copy the URL from my repo, but that's the URL. That gets us network helper. That gets us image helpers, along with data persistence. What's that? You had a question? I'll just slack it out, make it easier. All my stuff is private, huh?